Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, our negotiations have been held in a constructive atmosphere of mutual respect. We have very thorough negotiations that were quite useful. I would like to thank once again my American counterpart for the proposal to travel out here to Alaska. It only makes sense that we've met here because our countries, though separated by the oceans, are close neighbors. So when we've met, when I came out of the plane and I've said, "Good afternoon, dear neighbor. Very good to see you. In good health and to see you alive." I think that is very neighborly. And I think that's some kind words that we can say to each other. We're separated by the Strait of Bering, though there are 2 islands only between the Russian island and the U.S. island. They're only 4 kilometers apart. We're close neighbors, and it's a fact. It's also important that Alaska has to do with our common heritage, common history between Russia and the U.S., and many positive events have to do with that territory. Still, there is tremendous cultural heritage back from the Russian America. For example, Orthodox churches and a lot of more than 700 geographical names of Russian origin. During the Second World War, it was here in Alaska that was the origin of the legendary air bridge for the supply of military aircraft and other equipment under the Lend-Lease program. That was a dangerous and treacherous route over the vast emptiness of ice. However, the pilots of both countries did everything to bring closer the victory. They risked their lives and they gave it all for the common victory. I was just in the city of Magadan in Russia, and there is a memorial there dedicated to the Russian and the U.S. pilots. And there are 2 flags, the U.S. flag and the Russian flag. And I know that here as well there is such a memorial. There is a military burial place several kilometers away from here. The Soviet pilots that buried there who died during that dangerous mission. We're thankful to the citizens and the government of the U.S. for carefully taking care of their memory. I think that's very worthy and noble. We'll always remember other historical examples when our countries defeated common enemies together in the spirit of battle camaraderie and allyship that supported each other and facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions. It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they have fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue, naturally under the condition of serious and painstaking work, and this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone. And Special Envoy of the President, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible, and our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, at the border between Russia and the U.S., there was a so-called international date line. I think you can step over, literally, from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope that we'll succeed in that, in political sphere. I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound, and I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Radcliffe, thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think, you know, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. That made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, there you have it. President Trump and President Vladimir Putin just finishing up a brief press conference here. I'm joined by CBN's George Thomas. George, who had been reporting in Ukraine at the outset of the war for many months, and so obviously very familiar with the situation. George, what just happened here? What did we just see?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, the line that I caught from President Trump was, quote, "There's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while." So there's no deal until there's no deal. There was no talk of a ceasefire. President Putin referred to President Trump, saying that they've got a good business-like relationship. He said, obviously, that he hopes that the conflict in Ukraine will come to an end. He understands the concerns that the Ukrainians have about their own territorial integrity as well as their security. President Trump went on to say he has a fantastic relationship with President Vladimir Putin, obviously talking about how tough the relationship or the meetings have gone since he took office in January. He called today's meeting extremely productive, and then ended with the line, there's no deal until there's a deal. So I'm a little perplexed. There's no talk of a ceasefire. Looks like there's no talk of a second meeting. There's no talk of a trilateral meeting, meaning President Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Zelensky. I thought it was very interesting. Because President Trump made it very clear prior to arriving in Alaska this morning. He made it very clear that as soon as the meeting was concluded, his next call would be to Ukraine's President Zelensky, and then to NATO and the European allies. And he took the stage, basically saying he's going to get on a call with Zelensky and NATO allies to tell them about what happened. And it seems to me right now, unless you heard something else, that nothing really has happened. There's no ceasefire. There's no end to the shooting war that the Russians have launched since 2022 and continue. What's your sense, Dan? Did I miss something?
No, and there weren't really any specifics given from anything I heard. And feel free, by the way, comment in the chat if you heard something different that we didn't. You guys were all in here listening to it. Several hundred of you in here watching along with us. And also interesting, George, that there were no questions from reporters. They essentially, the format of this was they each gave a statement. Putin went first. Yeah. And then, they exchanged some pleasantries just about, hey, we have a great relationship, et cetera, et cetera. And then President Trump gave his sort of statement, but no specifics on Trump said that they made progress, that the talks were productive, but didn't say on what exactly.
Correct. In fact, Putin did. I jotted down the fact Putin did say that we have come to an agreement, but did not even specify what that agreement was. And it's interesting because he said right after he said we've come to an agreement, and he said following that he hopes that as a result of this agreement, that the Europeans would not do anything to scuttle the efforts that have been agreed upon here in Anchorage. So no specific details. What's interesting is that the way this was laid out ahead of today's meeting was that there was supposed to be a one-on-one meeting between President Trump and President Putin, and just between the two of them and their translators, and then it would be added. The group would be increased. You would have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as well as the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and along with the president. And then on the other side, you would have Sergei Lavrov, who is the foreign secretary, as well as two other top Russian leaders. Apparently, that didn't happen. And then it was supposed to be a business luncheon. And then finally, around 7:30 East Coast time, was supposed to be this press conference. They went straight to this three-way meeting, and then immediately straight to the press conference. The overall meeting, apparently, I was timing it, took around 3 hours and 10 minutes. But it was interesting because in an interview with Fox News' Brett Baier on Air Force One, he told Brett Baier categorically, he said that President Trump told Brett Baier that he would be very disappointed that if there was not an agreement to a ceasefire today, that the president would be very disappointed that would happen. And clearly it seems to me, at least, that they have reached absolutely no agreement.
What do you make, George, what do you make of the fact that they came out, because we were planning on this to happen in about 20 minutes from now at 7:30, and these sorts of things, at least in all the ones we've done here, in my time here covering these sorts of events and presidents having these joint press conferences, these joint meetings, and we cover them, not very many of them are early.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always late. Yeah. Is that anything, or is that just a sign of they both knew what they want, and then, because if they were close to a deal but didn't quite get a deal, but then they get out of there early, as some have noted, it seems like they both kind of wanted to get out of here.
Well, also interestingly, President Trump a couple of days ago mentioned that he said he would know within the first 2 minutes or so whether Putin was serious about a deal, and clearly, apparently, there was no agreement. And what was interesting, the one line that I saw through the interpreter when President Putin was speaking, he said, quote, "Russia is ready to work on Ukraine's security." What does that mean? What do you mean Russia is ready to work on Ukraine? Yeah. I mean, what is? I mean, that is.
That's kind of what is the security? I mean, the security is from them. Yeah, they're the ones that are the danger.
Exactly, Dan. And the other thing he said, quote, "Russia is ready to work, but the reasons of conflict should be resolved." Again, and I think it goes back to this crux. One of the things that Russian observers will note, and I've noted in my reporting on Putin for quite some time, while the U.S. administrations, be it Republican or Democrat, when the White House changes, from the Bush time to President Obama, and then to President Trump, and then to Biden, and then here we are with President Trump. You have these various policies and attempts to try to coddle this Russian bear known as Vladimir Putin and try to understand, Russian relations. I remember George W. Bush, when he met Vladimir Putin back when he was the president, I remember him saying, I looked into the eyes of Vladimir Putin and I saw his soul. So you have these various manifestations. Here President Trump saying that he has a fantastic relationship with Vladimir Putin. But the thing is, one thing that's constant in all of these various administrations is President Putin. He articulates both publicly and privately what he believes, what he wants to accomplish, and it has been very clear, as I have been reporting since 2014, since the first invasion by the Russians into Crimea and into the eastern Donbass region. Is this again this aspiration that Ukraine, and he made this reference, Dan, he made this reference in his opening statements about this whole idea that Ukraine and Russia have a very close relationship, blood brothers, so to speak, and that's very true. But then again, it's Putin that has been absolutely constant in all of these years of the various administrations. And clearly, it's very clear that he said, in order for us to have peace, we've got to go back to the root causes of what's happening here. He says we've got to go back to the reasons this conflict happened in the first place, and those issues need to be resolved. And it seems to me, again, another administration has come up against this Putin plumb line that never seems to change. As much as we try to coddle and try to woo Vladimir Putin with various sanctions or various enticing sticks and carrots, so to speak, it's very constant. He's not moving. And it looks like the fighting is going to continue. The line of contact is going to continue to be hot. There's going to be bloodshed on both sides. The reporting is in just the last week, over 7,000 Ukrainian and Russian soldiers have been either killed or injured. The numbers out of Russia is over a million Russian soldiers have been injured or killed. The Ukrainians have sustained over 400,000 casualties, killed or injured, tens of thousands of people displaced. So all of this coming together, I just, again, I'm sure the American side has to be frustrated, right? After all of this back and forth, Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, shuttling back between Washington, D.C. and Moscow, the back and forth with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is just so. It has to be frustrating for the Trump administration, because remember, Dan, we all remember that President Trump promised that within the first 24 hours of coming into office, he will end the war.
Well, and I think this is something that I expected President Trump to be all business, even more so than usual. This is sort of what he's known for, these sorts of meetings, right? This is his wheelhouse. But exactly. Like you said, in the early days of the administration earlier this year, he basically went out there and said, hey, I think we're going to get this done. And then Putin turned around and was just like, just kidding. And he keeps it going. And I think that made Trump look bad. And if there's one thing that President Trump definitely does not like, it is when someone attempts to make him look bad, especially on a global stage. So I would have to imagine this time around, he is laser focused. And so, I don't, particularly because that's what seems to irk him the most, when somebody tries to upstage him like that. And as we've talked about on other live streams as well, George, and like your reaction to this, like David Brody has said this line that Trump is all about the art of the deal, but what can you do when there's no deal to be made with somebody like Putin? You talk about this plumb line. And when that's the tell, by the way, for everyone watching, when you hear Putin say, Well, as long as we just address the root of the issue here, that's essentially the same thing as Hamas claiming that Israel shouldn't exist, right? They're like the root of the issue; they shouldn't exist.
Exactly.
And so, how do you even negotiate with that?
Yeah, exactly. And you know what's interesting in this interview that President Trump gave to Browder of Fox News, he made the statement. He said, if we don't get a ceasefire, because today was all about the ceasefire from Trump's perspective, from President Trump's perspective, going into today's meeting, his position was, let's get a ceasefire. The second meeting would be a sit-down meeting with you and Zelensky, and if needed, President Trump, he said, I will be there. And then we can talk about, exchanging of land. We can talk about economic. We can talk about security guarantees. I think what happened was President Putin came into this and came from the totally opposite side from where President Trump was. President Putin came in to this to say, listen, we have to first address all the root issues. We have to talk about the land swaps. And on the 700 Club today, I put out a map showing the eastern part of Ukraine and 4 specific provinces that is basically at the heart of the conflict, the raging conflict that the Russians are engaged in. These 4 provinces of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. And pretty much the Russians control between 70% to 99.5% of this territory. And the 99.5% is the Luhansk province, all the way close to the Belarusian border. And President Putin has insisted, I will stop the shooting if the Ukrainians evacuate from the areas that the Russians do not control, basically giving the Russians complete control of the entire eastern and southeastern seaboard, eastern and southeastern part of the country, and then we can talk about a ceasefire. I mean, this is the non-starter for both of these leaders.
Right. Yeah,
right?
give me the win, give me the victory, and then I'll agree to this. I mean, it's just
exactly. And what's interesting, I was just going to say, in his interview with Browder, he said, if we don't get a ceasefire together today, we're not going to meet again ever.
That's interesting. That's interesting because somebody I got to find this now. I got to scroll back up. But Henry pointed this out in the chat, and he asked, did Putin say next time in Moscow? And I'll have to go back and look at the transcript because I didn't hear everything that was said. So, that would be interesting with what you're saying there, George. And if Putin's thinking there's going to be another meeting in Moscow and Trump's like, I don't think so.
Correct. Exactly. And I think obviously this clearly, this was a big, from a public relations standpoint, right? I mean, I was looking at some of the commentary and from the reaction from some of members of Zelensky's administration to leading voices inside of Ukraine who were watching this play out from the moment President Trump and President Putin landed at the Richardson Air Base in Anchorage. They were just absolutely stunned at literally the red carpet treatment that President Trump rolled out for President Putin. The choreography of President Trump walking down the red carpet and then meeting President Putin halfway, all smiles, a handshake, then coming up to that podium with Alaska 2025 in the foreground. In the background, you've got fighter jets, you've got Air Force One, and then as they step up to the podium, you have B-52 bombers flying overhead with fighter jets surrounding the B-52 bomber. Obviously, for the United States, this maybe show a gesture to Vladimir Putin and what this pomp and circumstance. And what's so interesting, I was reading some of the reaction from the Russians. Apparently, Putin's presidential limo, we have the Beast, we call it the Beast, that carries the president of the United States. President Putin had his own limo there and was supposed to apparently ride in his own limo, and President Putin and President Trump were supposed to ride in the Beast, and they were both supposed to take this 2-minute drive to the hangar. But apparently, in the process, President Putin ended up in the car with the President of the United States inside the Beast. But again, this whole idea of welcoming this president, and the reaction from Ukraine was like, oh my gosh, this is a person who has been indicted by the International Criminal Court, the ICC, accused of perpetrating alleged war crimes, primarily accused of kidnapping tens of thousands of Ukrainian children and taking them over to Ukraine, not to even speak of the tens of thousands of people who have died in this war and the missiles that have been lobbed, the thousands of drones that have hit this nation. And here is the president of the United States welcoming to the United States a person accused of war crimes by the ICC, giving him such a royal treatment, being all friendly and chummy with him, while the other leader, Zelensky, whose country is getting gobbled up and whose country was attacked in 2014, not invited. I mean, the reaction from Ukraine was just unbelievable. But I will say this, to Zelensky's point, clearly this makes it's a big PR boon for Putin. It's a huge disappointment for the Trump administration. Huge disappointment, big time disappointment that he couldn't exercise his skills in the art of the deal to try and convince Vladimir Putin to stop the shooting, to let the guns fall silent, and to stop all of this. It's a huge blow to Trump.
Yeah, you would think so, George. I will say, having covered President Trump for some time now, as you have as well, yeah, you kind of can tell his mood a little bit. He doesn't exactly have a, I don't know if he plays cards or poker or not, but I mean, the poker face, I'm not sure. You can kind of see when he's irritated, right? I mean, we saw what happened with Zelensky in the White House, for example. He had absolutely no problem expressing his irritation out in front of the whole world. He didn't quite, I mean, I'll have to watch it back again, but I don't think Trump didn't seem like somebody incredibly frustrated in that particular moment, did he? I mean, am I misreading that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it could be, Dan, that he's holding back his wrath. It could be that on a world stage that he didn't want to take the moment like he did to President Zelensky in the White House, because I was anticipating, because you never know these days, right?
Right. No,
if you walk into the Oval Office these days, I remember South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, when he came into the White House. Boy, oh boy, what a show that was! That was all in the process of the, President Trump accused the South African president of basically targeting white farmers and so forth. And then we saw the dramatic display of the back and forth and the vitriol and the anger that was lobbed against President Zelensky of Ukraine. So I was wondering, if both of these guys are going to come up and they take questions from the press, how will what will it be like? It's kind of like an Oval Office meeting, right? With Trump in complete control and in the driver's seat. So you're absolutely right. Your observation of Trump's response, given the fact that no deal, no ceasefire was accomplished here, I think, the potential of the United States now levying huge sanctions on Russia's oil industry, right? So a couple of weeks ago, they basically said to the Indians, right, in this whole tariff negotiations, they basically said to the Indians, because you got to keep in mind, India is the largest importer of Russian oil. Second is China. And so they levied these sanctions against India for importing Russian oil. I think as a result of today, could the administration, because the president warned, if we don't get a ceasefire, there's going to be severe consequences. He reiterated that today on Air Force One during the press gaggle on the way to Alaska, somebody asked him, can you describe, what do you mean by severe consequences? And he repeated that phrase. And I'm wondering if the severe consequences, Dan, means that for the first time, perhaps, that the United States is going to go after Russia's oil industry and impose severe sanctions, not just on India, but on China, which opens up a whole gamut of issues, right? Sanctioning China on their consumption of oil and importation of oil from Russia. If the administration goes after the oil industry, the energy industry, that's going to be a game changer. That is really going to hurt Russia in a very significant way.
Yeah, I mean, it's all very interesting, and as we look at reacting to how Trump reacted to this, with there being no deal, like I said before, I think he was frustrated at what Putin did earlier in the year, but kind of backtracking on their talks that they had. So when I say that Trump was probably going into this one laser focused, excuse me, what I mean is I think he probably had a contingency plan for if this was how it went and they didn't get a deal done at this point. He's like, okay, if he's not going to come to the table and he doesn't do what I like, I'm going to play nice on the camera. But then here's what's going to happen afterwards. And so to your point on all those shoes that could possibly drop, there are definitely cards to play against Russia on the sanction front, on the oil front. There are certainly levers we can pull as a country to make things uncomfortable for Vladimir Putin. And so, I mean, time will tell as to what happens. And I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see soon whatever happens if Trump and Zelensky meet. Is there a meeting scheduled for them right now? And if not, will there be one?
Yeah, my understanding is that Zelensky is in London, holding up in London, in case something dramatic happened. Because again, Trump was of the mindset that if there's a ceasefire, instead of waiting a long time, listen, both the leaders would stay in Anchorage. Zelensky would fly over. The whole idea that we kept hearing, the whole narrative we kept hearing from Trump was that the ceasefire happens. Let's make this happen quickly. Let's do it within the next a couple of hours. So Zelensky would fly over to Anchorage, and there would be this trilateral meeting. So I think it'll be interesting to see. It's a big win, I think, for Zelensky, a huge win for Zelensky, because Zelensky has been saying all along, you cannot trust Putin. You need to understand what his ambitions are, and nothing is going to stop him. That is what Zelensky has been telling the Trump administration. You're not going to get anywhere with Vladimir Putin unless you really hold his feet to the fire and put economic sanctions on him. Show that we mean business as a global community of the Western countries, to put the kind of pressure that's needed in order to send a notice to the Russians. What's interesting, there's one quote that Trump said. He said, quote, "Many points were agreed to. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance." That one significant point. So again, I think this is the issue, right? Of either the ceasefire or what Putin came to the table hoping to get the administration to balk on.
Absolutely. All right. CBN's Dan Andros here, along with CBN's George Thomas. George, who, of course, you've seen his reporting from Ukraine when the war kicked off a couple years ago now. George was there for several months on the ground reporting, very familiar with this whole conflict. And I just want to encourage everyone that's in the chat. Thank you so much for hanging around here with us as we just watched President Putin and President Trump have this joint conference. It didn't end up really being a news conference because the reporters didn't ask any questions. They just sort of each gave a statement and then left the podiums. It didn't last very long, but appreciate you all being here. Make sure you comment and click like, do all of those things, because that will help us get noticed and help CBN get noticed in the chat more. And just an interesting side note, I mentioned this in the chat, by the way. I was in there jumping in, and I've noticed that YouTube is apparently This is the sort of thing. I mean, this is off topic here, but for the commenters, but they are ranking the commenters. So if you are engaged in commenting in, you can get a rank, and they got a whole point system and everything. And it looks like Phelps, Carol, and Ray, you guys are the podium commenters right now. And so, I mean, you're 1, 2, 3. So listen, I don't know what everyone else is doing if they want to get on the podium, but I mean, if I were I don't know if the CBN account can get onto the podium, but I'll just keep commenting and trying to get on there. But we enjoy hearing from you. If you have questions for George, make sure you get him in there. Write questions in caps so we can see it, because George, like I said, has very, very familiar with this conflict. So again, appreciate you all being here. You know, even just drop in where you're watching from on the chat. That's always good to see where y'all are from. But George, what else can we expect here in the coming days?
Well, I think for Zelensky, he's feeling good. He's feeling absolutely good. And maybe in addition to, I'll add this, in addition to potential crippling sanctions, I mean, we've put the toughest sanctions on Russia as we speak right now, but except for the energy sector. So I think what we could see in the days and hours or days ahead is going to be potential crippling sanctions on Russia's energy industry. Second, and I think is going to be very significant for the Ukrainians. Since the war started in 2022, the Ukrainians have been begging and asking the United States and NATO allies, give them the weapons, especially the missile capability, the missile technology that would allow them to hit further into Russian territory. Up until this time, the United States, along with Germany, Great Britain, France, and the other countries, have been reluctant to arm the Ukrainians with this kind of military equipment for the fear of getting into a hotter war, right? So I think as a way to put the pressure on Putin, saying, listen, okay, so we're going to, potentially we could see that the Ukrainians may finally get the kind of military assets they need in order to penetrate deeper into Russian territory, especially beyond the line of control, line of contact, rather. It's basically a military term for where the fighting takes place between Russian and Ukrainian forces, deeper into the Donbass region, deeper into Zaporizhia, deeper into Kherson, and even much deeper into actual Russian territory. So I think that could be a potential what we could see as a result of this. So maybe let's say, for example, it wasn't all that bad, and maybe another option here is that if there's some kind of progress, because he said President Trump said it was an extremely productive meeting. So let's take the flip side, okay? If President Trump says it was an extremely productive meeting, that could mean one of two things. One is that he has agreed, in principle, perhaps to meet with Zelensky and Trump, and maybe there's some negotiations in terms of where the starting point of the discussion is. If this is where Trump was, meaning let's start with a ceasefire, and Putin was on this side saying, no, let's talk about land swap, let's talk about Ukrainian military positions and so forth. Maybe there was some understanding that they would meet halfway, and that maybe in the meeting of that halfway is where they're at, and that we could potentially see, potential progress in maybe another meeting. Again, this is all speculation, but I'm very curious that he used that phrase, it was an extremely productive meeting. Indicates to me that perhaps, even though that Trump didn't get his ceasefire that he wanted today, that maybe there was a negotiation as to, we can meet again, and instead of a ceasefire as a starting point, that there is another midway point that they can agree on, that all three can come together. Who knows? We'll see. Again, that's speculation, trying to read into words, because we didn't get any more details as to what great progress meant, and what he mean by we didn't get there, but we will get there, but we didn't get there.
Well, we will certainly. Great analysis, George. Thank you so much for that. And we'll certainly keep you updated on CBN News, cbnnews.com, right here on the CBN News YouTube channel. If anything major happens over the weekend, we will do our best to bring that to you live. Certainly, we'll have timely coverage on this as news breaks. So that is where we're going to leave it for this live stream right now, this breaking news of President Putin and President Trump meeting and having their talks, and then briefly addressing press, but then not taking any questions, and then taking off. So again, stay tuned to cbnnews.com. George, thanks so much for being here and breaking this all down. Again, obviously, you've been very close to this situation, and so you know it very well. Appreciate your insights on this, sir.
You're most welcome. Thanks, Dan.
All right, and all of you watching, be safe. God bless. Have a fantastic rest of your weekend, and we'll see you soon.